conclude, kind of as a bedrock, that you ought not to bring a prosecution unless you believe in good faith that there's sufficient evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, and the jury will convict, and that a conviction can be sustained on appeal. There may be those instances in which you're pretty well convinced that a crime was committed and can identify the person who committed it, but you can't in good faith say a jury is likely to convict in this case. We believe that a jury will convict and that we can sustain it on appeal. Those are the principles that we tried to apply here, that we followed here. They're the same principles I've followed for 40 years as a federal prosecutor.
But what are you referring to when you say that there might be additional considerations involving the perception that you're criminalizing the behavior of political opponents?
Yeah, I mean, these are difficult things. For example, taking this case, I think all the members of the committee have had access to, whether they took advantage or not, I don't know, but we filed a classified appendix here, right? So there are some prosecutions where it may very well be that it looks like, and you think you can prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, but because of the classified nature of much of your evidence, it's never going to see the light of day. So that might preclude a prosecution. You know, things of that sort come up that are part of the prudential judgment that a prosecutor has to make in these matters.
I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The committee will take a short break, short recess. If we can come back in 10 minutes, so at 12:05, we'll come back, but give everyone a short break before we resume. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Durham. Mr. Durham, after Inspector General Horowitz found serious errors last year with one aspect of the Russia investigation, but found accusations of a politically motivated FBI plot to be baseless, Donald Trump said, quote, "I look forward to the Durham report, which is coming out in the not too distant future. It's got its own information, which is this information," meaning the Horowitz information, plus, plus, plus. Mr. Durham, do you consider your report to be the Horowitz report plus, plus, plus? Can you turn your mic on? I'm sorry.
I suppose that's for other people to judge. The report speaks for itself, in my view.
Okay. Your one criminal conviction was for doctoring an email about a surveillance warrant, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And who referred this individual for prosecution?
That matter was referred by the Inspector General's office.
Okay. And this individual pleaded guilty, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you tell us what his sentence was?
He was sentenced to 12 months probation.
That's right. Did you...
For fabricating a document which was used to get a surveillance order on an American citizen.
Did you charge any high-level FBI or intelligence officials with a crime?
No.
Right, you did not. In your report, you are highly critical of the FBI's Russia investigation. Is that fair to say?
Certain aspects of it, yes.
Okay. Did you recommend new charges as a result of those criticisms?
We weren't able to prove matters. I couldn't say under the guiding principles that we'd be able to prove matters beyond a reasonable doubt because of lack of recollections, passages of time, inconsistent statements, so no, we didn't.
So no, you did not, right. Did you suggest any significant changes to how future investigations should be conducted?
And I guess it's for others to judge whether there are significant suggestions or not. I think that more disciplined approaches to these matters can be affected by some of the recommendations we made, yes.
Okay. I would say you did not suggest any significant changes. In the FBI's statement in response to your report, it said that the FBI conduct you examined was, quote, "the reason that current FBI leadership already implemented dozens of corrective actions, which have now been in place for some time." Mr. Durham, do you know why the corrective actions have been in place for some time at the FBI?
I think I know, yes.
Okay. Is it because the Inspector General finished his report 3.5 years ago, making recommendations for changes that the FBI could make?
In part.
Okay. In the 4 years that you spent tracking down Donald Trump's conspiracy theories, other investigations were conducted and completed. These investigations and the Horowitz investigation primarily identified the problems with the FBI investigation. But the one thing the Horowitz report did not do was give Donald Trump and my MAGA Republican colleagues across the aisle talking points for their conspiracy theories. On that front, you delivered. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague, Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Durham, your report attempts to make a case that the Clinton investigations of Clinton were given more favorable treatment to that of President Trump. But you leave out one very notable example, and that is your report makes no discussion of the fact that the email investigation into Hillary Clinton was made very public before the election, was it not? You had James Comey discussing Hillary Clinton's emails in the days leading up to the election?
If I follow your question, I don't think that the report says that the Clinton that Mrs. Clinton was given more favorable treatment. I think what the report says is that the FBI exercised some considerable discipline in how it was going to approach those matters as compared to how the FBI people who were involved in Crossfire Hurricane approached Crossfire Hurricane. I think that's what the report says.
Why, Mr. Durham, would you leave out the glaring contrast between the FBI's public discussion of the Clinton investigation right before the election and its keeping confidential the Trump investigation? Wasn't that a glaring disparity in how they were both treated?
I don't know. I mean, the
Really don't know the answer to that
FBI
question?
did, and Mr. Comey did what they did. I was asked to.
Yes, they did what they did, and in glaring contrast to how they treated the Trump investigation, which was kept secret before the election, whereas the Clinton investigation was discussed publicly, affecting the outcome. Isn't that correct?
I can tell you that the FBI had that information and sat on it for months before they acted in
Yes, gentleman's time
making
is
a public disclosure.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Durham, thank you for coming to testify today before the committee. I'm a recovering attorney and a former judge.
Oh, God love you.
Thank you. As such, I know firsthand the importance of following procedures. I know law enforcement and prosecutors across this nation do that on a daily basis, and they do that because they want to ensure that a criminal investigation is conducted properly. They need to adhere to a full due process of law and fair application of the law. And quite frankly, process matters because how we go about our investigations will either give credibility to our conclusions or will belie our conclusions. Do you agree with that?
Wholeheartedly.
Would you agree that some of the important steps in an investigation would include simply vetting the initial information and claims, obtaining the relevant documents, talking to the relevant witnesses, determining the credibility of those witnesses and documents, and doing a lot of that by seeking corroboration of what is either provided in written testimony or oral testimony or in documentary form? Is that true?
That's absolutely true.
And the definition of corroboration is not difficult. Evidence that supports or confirms a statement, theory, or finding. It's effectively confirmation. That's what we need in an investigation is we need to confirm whether or not an allegation is true or not, correct?
Yes.
As your report showed, the FBI did not follow its well-established procedures and did not corroborate the information that they were receiving. Is that fair to say?
That's a fair statement.
Take, for example, page 54 of your report. You show that the FBI opened a full investigation into George Papadopoulos, but they did so a mere 3 days after receiving intelligence from Australia. During those 3 days, do you think the FBI attempted to corroborate the information they had initially received?
If they did, we didn't see any evidence of that fact.
In fact, on page 112 in your report, you say, quote, despite the lack of any corroboration of the Steele report, sensational allegations, however, in short order, portions of 4 of the reports were included in the initial Carter Page FISA application without further verification or corroboration of the allegations contained therein. You also state on page 57 about Australia. Australia could not and did not make any representation about the credibility of information, and that's because they couldn't verify or corroborate that information. Is that true?
That's correct.
You further go on to say on page 57 that, quote, the Office of Special Counsel found no indication from witness testimony, electronic communications, emails, calendar entries, or other documentation that at the time the FBI gave any consideration to the actual trustworthiness of information the diplomats received from Papadopoulos. Do you remember writing that portion of the report?
I do.
It seems amazing to me that the FBI would not give consideration to the actual trustworthiness of certain information found in an investigation at this level. You write extensively on how the FBI elected to not interview Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, or Charles Dolan. Would interviews with those key individuals have helped to corroborate or disprove the information that the FBI was receiving?
Yes.
Through your investigation, did you uncover any reason as to why the FBI elected to not interview these individuals?
I know that the people who were the operational people doing the investigation were told they could not interview Mr. Page until the seventh floor authorized it, and then the director didn't authorize the interview of Mr. Page until March of 2017.
You also noted that it took 75 days to pass the Steele dossier to the Crossfire Hurricane team. It seems to me that that is belying the ability of the investigative team to actually corroborate what the allegations were. Would you agree with that as well?
I would agree with that.
Mr. Durham, in my opinion, a failure to corroborate information leads to holes in credibility. It also gives rise to potential corruption or actual corruption. The American people now know, based on your report, that during the peak of a presidential campaign, the FBI elected not to follow its own basic procedures and instead launch a politically motivated investigation into a leading presidential candidate. I am confident and hopeful that there are still many good agents within the FBI who are there to perform their sacred duty of protecting and serving our nation, that undertake investigations on a daily basis without regard to political affiliation. That's my hope. That's my belief.
That's my experience.
But your report, Mr. Durham, shows that at least top FBI leadership in this case was politically motivated and did not follow longstanding procedures necessary for a proper criminal investigation. I heard you say to my colleagues on the left a little while ago, quote, nothing in their files would corroborate the claims. And another quote, not one single fact in the Steele dossier has been corroborated. It is amazing to me that we would go through a high-level investigation like this and fail to adhere to a basic principle of investigative procedures, and that is corroborate the witness testimony and corroborate the evidence. With that, I yield my time, and I thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Ross from North Carolina for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Durham, for your endurance. You have cited and discussed the Justice Department's principles of federal prosecution. And I'd just like you to explain for the public what that is. What are those principles?
Sure. You know, the general principles of federal prosecution, as I've indicated, provide that a federal prosecutor should not bring criminal charges unless he or she believes that the evidence that will be admissible at trial is sufficient to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that a jury can convict based on that evidence, and that if the conviction were obtained, then the conviction would be sustained on appeal or upheld on appeal. Okay. Those are the basic principles we operate under.
Thank you very much. And one major goal of the principles is to ensure that individuals' rights are, quote, scrupulously protected. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the principles also contain a limitation on identifying uncharged third parties publicly. Is that correct?
There is a limitation on that, yes.
It states that in all public filings and proceedings, federal prosecutors should remain sensitive to the privacy and reputation interests of uncharged third parties. I'm just quoting it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Do you believe that you adhered to this limitation in your prosecutorial filings in the Sussman and Danchenko cases?
Yes.
Now, that's very interesting because many legal scholars noted that in your filings, you laid out not just the prosecution for the court to consider, but you appeared to be alleging a conspiracy that you did not intend to prosecute. Rather than indicting Mr. Sussman on the narrow charge of lying to the FBI, this is a charge which a unanimous jury of his peers acquitted him of, your filing broadly alleges a vast Clinton conspiracy identifying various individuals, and at least one of whom you never prosecuted. And after the Sussman indictment was filed, on September 16th of 2021, for example, President Trump's allies used the broad conclusions you allege to construct a political narrative damaging the reputations of uncharged individuals. In fact, on September 19th, 2021, Eric Trump spoke with the Washington Inquirer, treating these uncharged allegations as fact. And the next day, on September 20th, 2021, Trump associate Kash Patel told Fox News that the indictment offers a good view into future charges, including what he called a very well laid out conspiracy charge that will envelop people in and around Hillary Clinton's campaign. Did you read these interviews, or are you aware of them?
I did not read them. I can imagine that that's what people were saying, but I
Yeah.
did not read them. I don't read a lot of newspapers, so listen to a lot of news. Makes my
But
life a lot
had
easier.
you known that that was what was going to be done with the indictment, would you have used greater caution?
I think we took great care in drafting and crafting that indictment, and did, to the best of our ability, comply with all of the department's policies and procedures regarding third persons. I think if you take a look at the indictment, in any number of instances, for example, people's identities were masked. We didn't use a person's name.
So
We're not
I'm
used
just
to-
going to reclaim my time, because I think that there were people who were implicated, and there was not a narrow enough tailoring of the indictment. And then, in fact, after the February 11th filing in the Sussman case, Donald Trump told Fox News that the conspiracy he claims you described but never prosecuted amounted to treason at the highest level, and said, if you read the filing and have any understanding of what took place, and I called this a long time ago, you're going to see a lot of other things happening, having to do with what really just is a continuation of the crime of the century. This is such a big event, nobody has seen anything like it. And given that kind of politicization of what you did, do you think that you could have exercised more caution again with respect to third parties?
I exercised my judgment under the guiding principles that I had, and whether or not an indictment ought to be returned, and decided on that basis. I would say, did I give consideration to what Donald Trump might say about it? I would say that was not part of my consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is now recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, thank you for being here. I know it's been one heck of a slog. I wish that we could, just stick to the matter at hand, which is your report, but it's been interesting. We've been all over the place. Fidelity, bravery, and integrity. These are the words that have guided the FBI through countless generations. Dishonesty, deception, and corruption, I'm sad to say. The stark contrast and unfortunate reality we now find ourselves in. A reality that has revealed a politicized, weaponized, and corrupted Federal Bureau of Investigation in desperate need, in my opinion, for a complete restructuring. One of the most egregious examples of dishonesty that the Durham report reveals relates to a critical piece on page 16 that summarizes a deeply troubling chain of events. Igor Danchenko, who was instrumental in the formation of the Steele dossier, claimed that one of his subsources was Sergei Milyan, a Belarusian-American businessman and publicly known to be a Trump supporter. The report goes on to highlight that Danchenko claimed to have received an anonymous phone call from an individual he later claimed to be Milyan. On page 173, it is stated this call supposedly revealed, quote, a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between the Trump campaign and Russian leadership, end quote. What's the kicker here? The kicker is Danchenko had never met nor spoken with Milian prior to this call, and told the Crossfire Hurricane team that despite never actually meeting Milian, he recognized his voice from a YouTube video. This blatant lie was taken at face value by both Christopher Steele and the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Think about that. Everybody think about that. Danchenko was a foreign agent who the FBI was paying, by the way, we haven't talked about that much, hundreds of thousands of your taxpayer dollars, tells a blatant lie, which leads to 4 FISA applications and lays the foundation for the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. And that's what it was. You may not like it, but that's what it was. One of the greatest disgraces this country, in my opinion, has ever seen. Americans are literally paying the price for this corruption. Such an egregious and intentional abandonment of the common procedures that FBI agents are supposed to follow truly encapsulates why so many Americans, including myself, are calling for complete restructuring of the FBI. And it is a reason why now, years later, the country finds itself so divided. Mr. Durham, is it accurate to say the Crossfire Hurricane investigators made little to no effort to corroborate Danchenko's version of events relating to Milian?
That would be correct.
Thank you. And is it accurate to say that despite not corroborating this information, that Crossfire Hurricane still used the Milian accusation to bolster the Carter Page FISA applications?
And that information was used in the initial FISA application and the 3 renewal applications.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Given the lack of effort by the Crossfire Hurricane investigators to validate Danchenko's assertions about Milian and their use of these unverified allegations in the Carter Page FISA application, does this raise any legal or ethical concerns about the validity of these FISA applications?
I think it's been recognized by the department and certainly by the FISA court that with respect to at least some of those applications, they would never have been authorized. So it wouldn't have been granted had the information been disclosed.
So it did help in achieving the FISA approval?
Without question.
Okay. I mean, we're getting to these are the real issues. Misinformation, bad people, moving forward, getting FISA applications, doing all that they did. I have one quick last question. Do you believe the FBI has been politicized and weaponized and is in need for complete restructuring? I know I do. I know you have a softer version of it. I think too much happened. Too many bad things happened that you just can't move a few people around and make some minor changes. I think you need some major changes. And I also want to say there are many good people that work for the Department of Justice and work for the FBI. Proud to know them. These folks surely were not.
Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may respond if he chooses.
Yeah, and what I can say is that there were identified, documented, significant failures of a highly sensitive, unique investigation that was undertaken by the FBI. I think the investigation clearly reveals that decisions that were made in one direction. If there was something that was inconsistent with the notion that Trump was involved in a well-coordinated conspiracy with the Russians and whatnot, that information was largely discarded or ignored. And I think, unfortunately, that's what the facts bear out.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Special Counsel Durham, for your time today. I yield the balance of my time to my colleague from California, Representative Adam Schiff.
I thank you for yielding. One of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle took issue with my saying that the Trump campaign invited Russian help, received Russian help, made use of it, and then lied about it. So let's break this down. Let's go to invited Russian help. Mr. Durham, you're aware of Donald Trump's public statements along the lines of, hey, Russia, if you're listening, hack Hillary's emails, you'll be richly rewarded by the press. You aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
And are you aware that Mueller found that hours after he made that plea for Russian help, the Russians, in fact, tried to hack one of the email servers affiliated with the Clinton campaigner family?
If that happened, I'm not aware of that. I mean, it could very well.
You're not aware of that in the Mueller report? So when you say you're not aware of evidence of collusion in the Mueller report, it's because you apparently haven't read the Mueller report very well. If you're not aware of that fact. But let me ask you about something else.
Sure.
Don Jr., when offered dirt as part of what was described as a Russian government effort to help the Trump campaign, said, if it's what you say, I love it. Would you call that an invitation to get Russian help with dirt on Hillary Clinton?
The words speak for themselves, I suppose.
I think they do. And in fact, he said, especially late in summer. Late in summer was around when the Russians started to dump the stolen emails, wasn't it?
Late in the summer, there was information that was disclosed by WikiLeaks in mid to late July. I think there had been some in June, and then there was maybe some later in October, was it? I think, but don't hold me to those dates.
And this gets to the receipt of help. The second thing I mentioned, receiving Russian help. The dumping of those emails, by the way, just as forecast by what Papadopoulos told the Australian diplomat, that is that the Russians would help by leaking dirt anonymously through cutouts like WikiLeaks and DC Leaks.
I don't think that's exactly what he told the Australians, but.
Well, he said that he was informed that the Russians could help by anonymously releasing this information, right?
Release what?
By anonymously releasing information damaging to Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you read what's in the cable and what's in the report as to what the diplomats reported was there was a suggestion of a suggestion that the Russians could help. They had damaging information as to Mrs. Clinton. And
by releasing it anonymously, right? And that's exactly what happened, isn't it?
I don't.
You really don't know?
I'm not sure exactly. When you say exactly what happened.
Well, the Russians released stolen emails through cutouts, did they not?
There were emails.
It's a very simple question. Did they release information, stolen information through cutouts, yes or no?
Yeah, I'm not sure that.
You really don't know the answer to that? The answer is yes, they did. Through DC Leaks.
Well, in your mind, it's yes.
Well, Mueller's answer was yes. More important than mine, Mueller's answer was yes. Now, that information, of course, was helpful to the Trump campaign, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, but that the Russians intruded into,
well, I just want to
hacked into the systems, they released information.
And that was helpful to the Trump campaign, right?
And the conclusion in the ICA and in the Mueller investigation was that the Russians intended to assist.
Can you answer my question, Mr. Durham? That was helpful to the Trump campaign, right?
Yeah, that's.
And Trump made use of that, as I said, didn't he, by touting those stolen documents on the campaign trail over 100 times?
I said, I don't really read the newspapers or listen to the news. I don't
Really,
find all that reliable, so I don't know that.
Mr. Durham, were you totally oblivious to Donald Trump's use of the stolen emails on the campaign trail more than 100 times? Did that escape your attention?
I am not aware of that.
Are you aware of the final prong that I mentioned, that he lied about it, that the Trump campaign covered it up? It's the whole second volume of the Mueller report. I hope you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that's a section of the report, the second volume, relating to what their obstruction of justice.
Well, thank you for confirming what my Republican colleague attacked me about. Now, he also criticized the use of the word collusion, apparently giving private polling data to the Russians while the Russians are helping your campaign. They don't want to call collusion. Maybe there's a better name for it. Maybe they would prefer we just call it good old-fashioned GOP cheating with the enemy. Maybe that would be a little bit more accurate description.
Yeah.
Because this is what happened, but they seem allergic to calling it for what it is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Dolan, I will quote excerpts from your report describing the FBI actions in Trump's case. You call them sobering, I call them alarming. Rapid opening, made no sense, no sound reason, no explanation, difficult to explain, no follow-up, uncorroborated evidence, unevaluated information, rumors and speculations, thin intelligence, exculpatory statements were not included, misrepresentation of the recorded conversation, noticeable departure, not using typical tools, serious lack of rigor, choose to ignore red flags, unwarranted delay, ignore nearly all recommendations, didn't disclose intelligence, not inform of inconsistencies, did not give appropriate attention to facts, did not adequately examine, did not receive satisfactory explanation, was not informed, never corrected assertion, never advised, never been apprised, never gave appropriate consideration, no further action, failed to make known, failed to act, failed to follow logical leads, failed to interview, failed to revise the paperwork, failed to take even the basic steps, failed to determine, failed to provide, failed to integrate, failed to fully exploit the materials, failed to critically analyze information, failed to properly consider, failed to correct errors, ignored contrary evidence, was never brought to the attention, intentionally falsified in material documents, fabricated the allegation, omission of material fact, numerous significant defects, 17 material errors and omissions, inaccurate representation, deliberately shut down, told not to write and provide findings orally, incorrectly noted, missed another opportunity, omitted email, omitted information, did not corroborate, never sought to obtain records, resisted efforts, conflicting recollection, troubling failure of recollection, not in a single FBI employee, curious change in assessment, key players declined to be interviewed, lacked sufficient probable cause, frustration on the part of investigators, sense of betrayal, highly unusual instruction, director was really shocking, and the list goes on. Dolan, with extensive connection to the Democrat Party and access to senior Russian officials and Putin's think tank, was never interviewed, request was denied, case was never opened, Auden instructing to cease all research and analysis related to Dolan. Leadership directed to dedicate no resources to Dolan. FBI interviewed hundreds of individuals, yet they did not interview Dolan. Danchenko failed to properly consider prior Russian counter-espionage case. FBI's validation unit raised serious concern. Management ignored and resisted nearly all recommendations and supported continued payment to him. Jonas Wagner, special envoy to Secretary Kerry to Libya, who worked as lobbyist for Russian oligarch Deripaska with ties to Putin, disseminated still dossier to the US official and destroyed his records. Deripaska was allowed to buy, control, and package in uranium company with extensive mining projects in the United States approved by Secretary Clinton's State Department in 2010. The former head of the FBI's counterintelligence division in New York, McGonigal, involved with this case, recently was accused of taking money from Deripaska. Clinton case from your report stands in stark contrast. Lack of action, considerable caution, never open inquiry, in limbo, linger, defensive brief, and corroborating information, no effort to investigate cease and desist due to the undisclosed concern, decline to issue subpoenas. You're concerned with FBI's reputational harm. But it appears to me, using Director's Clapper's lexicon, this case has all classic earmarks of collusion and cover-up. However, not one person went to jail, and Clinton campaign operatives like Jake Sullivan now have the highest national security position in our government, who's actually driving a very slow response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you believe that justice has been served?
I can speak to what my team and I did, which was to try
Just tell me yes or no. Do you believe has been served?
We tried to serve justice to the best of our ability.
Okay.
I can speak on that.
You also state Russian intelligence knew of still election investigation for the Clinton campaign before Crossfire Hurricane was opened, and still sub-sources could have been compromised by Russian. However, FBI have not appropriately considered to the possibility that the still reports was Russian disinformation. Is that correct?
If we're talking about Mr. Danchenko?
No, just you said, and this is in your report, you say that Russia, FBI never considered the possibility that still reports was Russian disinformation in full on part. Is that correct? That they didn't. Do you know why?
I don't know why, but I think that's correct.
Another question. CHS-1 FBI spy, and I'm assuming Stephen Halper, invited Page at the request of the FBI to conference in UK, created Manafort-Page conspiracy allegation in direct conflict with his recordings. FBI never fully transcribed recording, misstated the Crossfire Hurricane's significant improper fact on Page session conversation. He didn't show up with subpoena and what included in very shady case in 1980s. In your report, you were able to establish that CHS intentionally lied to the FBI. You were not able to establish why and what you did.
Okay, I'm not sure.
CHS-1.
I'm sorry?
CHS-1, you said that you were not able to establish that CHS-1 intentionally lied to the FBI. What did you do and what didn't do? to establish it. He's not able to establish.
Let me see, this is on page 89?
The gentlelady's time has expired. We'll let the witness answer. I think she's referring to confidential human source number 1, Mr.
Yeah,
Durham.
you said you were unable to establish it. It's at the end of your report. I think it's at the end. This is on page 243.
243,
Yep.
okay. So the context of that is in the Steele reporting, one of the pieces of information that had been used in the dossiers was that Mr. Page allegedly
But
had...
what, did you interview him? What did you do to establish?
We got to move quickly.
Mr.
The
Chairman,
gentlelady's time has expired. We'll let the witness answer the question. We are going to have to stick closer to the 5-minute rule because they're holding votes on the floor until we finish today's business.
Okay, so I can...
You can answer real quick, sure.
So one of the things in the Steele report was that Carter Page allegedly had met with 2 sanctioned Russians when he was in Moscow in July. We were able to establish that that was not the truth. I mean, you look at the evidence that that's not true, and the FBI should have been able to detect that, and they didn't detect it. But that was a meeting that supposedly occurred in July of 2016, or meetings, one of them with Mr. Sechin. Later, when the FBI had opened Crossfire Hurricane, and in December of 2016, CHS-1 met with Mr. Page, again, recorded a conversation with Mr. Page. And he, several days later, told his handling agent that, I forgot to tell you that Page said that on Page's most recent trip to Russia, where he worked or had business interests, he met with Sechin. And the FBI, when you look at the communications in the FBI, they're saying, that sounds kind of screwy here, but we should look at that. They apparently never looked at that. We went and got the recording of that conversation that had occurred between CHS-1 and Mr. Page in December of 2016. And Page never said that he had met with Sechin on his most recent visit.
Mr. Chairman, the overruns, I appreciate the fact to give him a chance to answer.
You're definitely going to